Saint Gregory the Great. Sounds like a superhero. Saint Gregory the Great. I think I'd be pleased with Saint Alan the Mediocre, or even Saint Alan the slightly above average. But that's not who we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about Saint Gregory the Great, who lived a long time ago in a very different cultural context, but whose life had twists and turns, and he felt something, this kind of tug in his own life that I think can relate to us today. So Saint Gregory the Great was born in the mid-500s and worked his way up through the Roman political system, and all the way up to becoming prefect of Rome. I've tried to understand what that means. I don't really know what that means. From what I can grasp, it's sort of like a commander, like an army commander, and somewhere between that and a mayor of Rome. So he was a big leader within the political environment in Rome. And yet he found that even though he had worked his way to some prestigious civil position, he felt really empty. And he must have had lots of means, because he had multiple estates. And he converted one of his estates in Sicily into 6 monasteries. And he felt this tug to leave this a successful world, success behind, and turned his own home into a monastery. I was trying to imagine what that would have been like, to just all of a sudden start inviting people into your home, and what that must have been like for him as he transitioned from being this great civil leader to now he has people living in his house and he's a monk. It must have been a very curious thing for his neighbors to grasp. But he describes these years in the monastery as the happiest of his life. He was contemplative, he was quiet, and yet even there, the Pope at the time asked him to be a delegate to Constantinople and was the papal delegate there. He was ordained a deacon and bishop and the Bishop of Rome. So he was pulled from his monastery to become the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, something he didn't want. And what's interesting is, as Pope, he lived in a really tumultuous time. There was famine, there was plague, we know what that's like. And yet in that, he did some liturgical reforms. He's somewhat credited for the founding of Gregorian chant, which was very simple chant melodies or song melodies that could be sung in the vernacular language of Latin of the day. But what I think is interesting about him is he felt this tug between where he felt at peace, the monastery, and between the world. Now, I think that's something that Peter can relate to in our gospel today. Peter, who is, I imagine, just kind of wanted to hang out in the boat with Jesus, but yet Jesus calls him out of the boat to become a fisher of men. So to each of us in our own lives, I imagine most of us listening to this are not religious in the sense that we live in a monastery with other people who have dedicated their life to the monastic life. So we know this kind of tugging of the heart, this yearning of our heart to be quiet, to be still, to have that peace and time for prayer. But yet we're also very much living in a world that pulls us in all sorts of directions. So we know what that tug that Gregory feels like. So today maybe we're invited to think about his example and how he knew that he needed to cultivate that monastery in his heart, to have that interior place where he could turn to Christ in prayer, to cultivate a little silence in order to make it through the rest of his day. So take a couple moments today to cultivate to build up that little monastery in your own heart, so that you can build the kingdom of God where he needs you to today.